In the final decades of the 18th century, the French monarchy stood at a crossroads. A young king, thoughtful but unprepared. A queen, dazzling but misunderstood. And a palace, Versailles, where ritual replaced reality and the illusion of control masked a growing storm. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette inherited a world built on ceremony and splendor. But beneath the surface, time was running out. He was the last king of France before the Revolution. Born into privilege, remembered for his indecision, and executed as a traitor. Louis Auguste was born in Versailles in 1754. One of 7 children, he was the 3rd son of Dauphin Louis and Mary Josepha of Saxony. Shy, intelligent, and reserved, he was not destined to be king. His grandfather, Louis XV, still ruled, and 2 older brothers stood before him in the line of succession. Louis Auguste grew up with a fine memory, a love of history and geography, and even mastered Latin and English. But he lacked confidence. He was a gentle, hesitant boy, ill-prepared for the role fate would soon hand him. Before Louis Auguste was even born, his family had already known loss. In 1754, his older brother Xavier died in infancy. Another brother, the Duke of Burgundy, followed in 1761. 4 years later, their father, the Dauphin and rightful heir to the throne, also passed away of tuberculosis. Thus, at just 11 years old, in December of 1765, the quiet Louis Auguste became the new Dauphin of France. In 1770, still only 15, the future king was married to Austrian Duchess Marie Antoinette. In a union meant to repair and strengthen the fragile alliance between Austria and France, 2 former enemies. The marriage was not only a diplomatic effort, but also a symbol of peace between rival dynasties. Despite the initial challenges, Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI slowly adapted to married life. Though their union remained awkward and unconsummated for several years, a scandal whispered across European courts. Rumors and gossip were fueled further by Louis's reported health issues. Over time, the couple grew closer and had 4 children: Marie-Therese, Louis-Joseph, Louis-Charles, later Louis XVII, and Sophie, who tragically died in infancy. Louis and Marie Antoinette also took in 6 adopted children, ranging from orphans to the children of palace servants. 3 lived with them, while others were supported by the crown. Behind the grandeur, Louis was a devoted father. The loss of Sophie and later Louis-Joseph brought deep grief to the royal couple. He became King of France and Navarre on his grandfather's death on the 10th of May 1774. Well-meaning, modest and austere, King Louis XVI lacked confidence and strength of character. He wanted to be a good king, but he could not overcome the obstacles before him. In 1787, the king signed the Edict of Versailles, granting non-Catholic civil rights, a bold step toward religious tolerance. But France's greatest problem was debt. Several finance ministers attempted to introduce new taxes, yet the nobility firmly resisted. King Louis was indecisive, unwilling to enforce the reforms that might have saved his monarchy.
He was a nobleman, future monarch, more interested in his own hobbies, like locksmith, mechanics, geography, art, and history. He could have been a good king if he would channel his passion into the kingdom. He lacked the qualities of a true king.
In foreign policy, the king took risks. France had lost its colonies to Britain in the 7 Years' War. When American colonists revolted, Louis seized the chance for revenge. France poured over 1 billion livres into the American Revolution. Money borrowed at high interest. The Americans gained independence. France gained nothing but pride and bankruptcy. By 1789, France was effectively bankrupt. In desperation, Louis convened the Estates General, an institution that had not assembled for nearly 2 centuries. But rather than resolving the crisis, it ignited the revolution. The representatives of France's common people, the so-called Third Estate, broke away, declaring themselves the National Assembly. In June, they swore the tennis court oath, promising a constitution for France. In July, the storming of the Bastille shook the kingdom. Louis, indecisive as ever, wavered. He wore the revolutionary tricolour and was hailed as the restorer of French liberty. But the trust between king and people was broken. At heart, Louis was a shy and gentle man. He preferred quiet pursuits and the refuge of routine. But in a time of national crisis, his retreat into these private comforts looked like indifference. To a starving nation, their king seemed distant, even oblivious.
To maintain the crown of France in the 18th century, he found himself ruling during the French Revolution, a time of immense upheaval and uncertainty. Ruling a kingdom on the brink of collapse required exceptional strength.
On October 5th, 1789, an angry mob stormed Versailles, forcing the royal family to move to Paris, where they lived under guard at the Tuileries Palace. In June 1791, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette attempted to escape to the Austrian border in what became known as the Flight to Varennes. Disguised and traveling under false names, they nearly succeeded, but the Queen was recognized by a postmaster who had seen her portrait. The royal family was arrested and brought back to Paris in disgrace. The failed escape confirmed the people's worst fears, that their king and queen might betray France to a foreign power. In 1792, France went to war with Austria. Rumors spread that Louis and Marie were plotting with foreign enemies. Then came the Brunswick Manifesto, issued by a Prussian general, demanding that the king be protected and royal authority restored. But instead of calming tensions, it fueled the flames of anger. In August 1792, the Tuileries Palace was stormed. A month later, the monarchy was abolished, and France was declared a republic. Louis XVI was put on trial, and despite pleas and a nation in turmoil, he was executed in January 1793, a defining moment that marked the symbolic collapse of the old order. Nine months afterward, his wife met the same fate. Louis XVI's reign was marked by indecision, tragedy, and reform attempts that came too late. He was not a tyrant, but a hesitant man, overwhelmed by forces beyond his control. His execution marked the end of the ancient regime and the birth of modern France.
We could say that as king he was not up to the task. Louis XVI was unable to communicate effectively with the competing factions of French politics. He failed to address the fundamental needs of his people: food, security, tax reform, and relief of the fiscal strain caused by France's wars with England.
So was he weak, unlucky, or simply caught in history's storm? Whatever the answer, Louis XVI remains one of history's most tragic kings, remembered not for what he built, but for how he fell. The death of Louis XVI marked the end of an uncertain reign. And by his side, a queen endured until the last moment. Marie Antoinette, whose destiny and tragedy were inseparably bound to the final days of the kingdom. From the glittering halls of Versailles to the shadow of the guillotine, Marie Antoinette was a queen draped in silks and scandal. Loved, hated, and misunderstood. She was born on November 2nd, 1755 in Vienna, as Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna von Habsburg-Lothringen, but history would remember her as Marie Antoinette. A child of Holy Roman Emperor Francis I and Empress Marie Theresa of Austria. She studied music, dance, and etiquette, but her academic performance was considered unexceptional. Still, her charm, looks, and grace made her a strong candidate for a diplomatic marriage. When she was just 14 years old, she was married off to the French Dauphin Louis Auguste. In an effort to repair and strengthen the fragile alliance between Austria and France, two former enemies. When she arrived at the French court, she was met with suspicion and hostility. Many nobles resented her as a foreigner, and the French people were wary of this young, unfamiliar royal.
The role entrusted to Queen Marie Antoinette was an exceptionally difficult one. Despite the unfavorable reputation that has persisted over time, she often acted with genuine goodwill. Much of the negative propaganda surrounding her was fueled by factions within the French nobility, who resented her foreign origins and blamed her for failing to produce a male heir to the throne. This, in turn, reflected poorly on the king, as the young and attractive queen became an easy target for rumors that distorted their relationship and her role at court.
Her marriage to Louis XVI was distant and under intense scrutiny. But her children became her refuge. Unfortunately, tragedy struck repeatedly. Her daughter Sophie died as an infant, and son Louis-Joseph passed away at just 7. Another son, Louis Charles, endured imprisonment and abuse during the Revolution, dying at age 10, while only Marie-Therese survived. Carrying the weight of her family's shattered legacy through exile and a lifetime of hardship. Even as history remembers Marie Antoinette for her opulence, it was her devotion to her children and the heartbreak she suffered losing them that reveals the queen behind the crown. Marie Antoinette struggled with the rigid protocols of French royal life. In an effort to reclaim control over her world, she withdrew to a private estate. The Petit Trianon, which Louis XVI gifted her in 1774. The Petit Trianon, a neoclassical hideaway tucked deep within the palace grounds of Versailles. Isolated from the rigid protocols and suffocating traditions of court life, the Queen used this private estate as a personal sanctuary. She indulged her love of nature, gardening, and animals, keeping pets ranging from poodles to swans, and walking them through her private gardens. There she entertained close friends, hosted lavish parties, and famously played at being a shepherdess, dressed in simple gowns and strolling through manicured gardens designed to mimic the countryside. But while it was her escape, to the French public, it symbolized just how disconnected their queen had become from the hardships of ordinary citizens. When King Louis XV died in 1774, Marie Antoinette became Queen of France. She was just 19. While the kingdom teetered on economic collapse, the Queen was seen wearing lavish gowns, gambling, hosting masked balls, and spending time at her private retreat. Behind the scenes, she quietly supported charities, orphans, and hospitals, often without seeking recognition, revealing a compassionate side rarely shown in public. With her new role came new scrutiny and a growing resentment from the French people, especially as the country's financial crisis deepened.
The nobility would accuse the queen of wasting the kingdom's wealth on pastries and extravagant gowns. These claims fueled rumors that spread quickly throughout France, feeding the unrest that would lead to revolution. It was a tragic fate for a queen who, had she been born or married into another monarchy might have flourished far more.
Pamphlets circulated painting her as greedy, manipulative, and foreign. She was dubbed Madame Deficit. She became a scapegoat for all of France's problems, even though she had little political power at the time. The most famous line ever attributed to her, "Let them eat cake," was never actually spoken by her, but it symbolized how disconnected she seemed from the struggles of everyday people. One scandal, above all, devastated her reputation. The affair of the diamond necklace. In 1785, a confidence trickster posing as a friend of the Queen convinced a high-ranking cardinal to purchase an expensive diamond necklace, worth the modern equivalent of millions, supposedly on Marie Antoinette's behalf. She had nothing to do with it, but when the truth came out, the damage was done. The public believed she had tried to buy the necklace in secret, and that she had manipulated the church to get her way. The trial was sensational, and though she was cleared of charges, the stain on her name never faded. By 1789, anger boiled over. France was on the brink of collapse. Food was scarce. The king was indecisive. And the queen, once just unpopular, was now hated. That summer, the Bastille was stormed and the French Revolution had begun. The royal family was forced to leave Versailles and move into the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where they were held under house arrest. Though fearful, Marie Antoinette tried to play a more active political role. She wrote letters, met with advisors, and tried to forge secret alliances to protect the monarchy. But it was too late. In 1791, she and Louis attempted to escape to the Austrian border in what became known as the Flight to Varennes. Disguised and traveling under false names, they nearly made it, but Marie was recognized. The family was arrested and brought back to Paris in disgrace. The failed escape confirmed the people's worst fears: that their queen would betray them to a foreign power. Nine months after her husband was executed, Marie Antoinette herself stood trial. She was accused of treason, draining France's finances, and conspiring with Austria. Her trial lasted just 2 days, and the outcome was never in doubt. On the morning of October 16th, 1793, she was led through the streets of Paris in an open cart. Wearing a simple white dress, her hair cut short. She was then executed by a guillotine in today's Place de la Concorde in the heart of Paris. She was 37 years old. Her body was thrown into an unmarked grave, but years later, after the fall of Napoleon, she and Louis were reburied in the royal necropolis just north of Paris, the traditional resting place of French kings and queens. And yet, the story didn't end there. Marie Antoinette became more than just a queen. she became a myth. Over the centuries, she's been portrayed as a villain, a fashion icon, a political pawn, and even a tragic heroine. Films, books, operas, and museums have all tried to capture her essence. Historians remain divided. Some argue that her extravagant lifestyle helped fuel the revolution. Others say she was misunderstood, an inexperienced young woman caught in the gears of history, vilified by propaganda, and executed not for who she was, but for what she represented. Her life also reflected the cultural and artistic vibrancy of Versailles, as well as the pressures on women in power. Though the Queen and King no longer walked these halls, Versailles remained standing, a silent witness to centuries of splendor and decline. Its corridors, gardens, and mirrors reflect the lives of the monarchs who once inhabited them, and the memory of a world that has vanished. Before Versailles became the symbol of French grandeur, before the Hall of Mirrors dazzled diplomats and queens, there was only forest and the sound of hoofbeats. In August of 1607, Versailles welcomed its first royal footsteps when the Dauphin, the future Louis XIII, came for a hunting trip. Surrounded by wild meadows and dense woodlands alive with pheasants, boars, and stags, he discovered more than an ideal hunting ground. He found a quiet refuge. At just 3 years old, Louis XIV was brought to Versailles, escaping a smallpox outbreak that swept through the royal court. He likely remembered none of it, but fate had already drawn him to the place that would one day bear his mark. The boy who would soon become the Sun King had entered the orbit of a chateau designed to become the center of his world. By 1661, Louis XIV claimed Versailles not just as a retreat, but as a canvas. He envisioned a palace that would rival the gods, a political statement in stone. Year after year, wing after wing rose, the royal chapel, the dazzling Hall of Mirrors, and fountains so elaborate they needed entire rivers rerouted. It had become a glittering symbol of absolute monarchy, centered on the king's authority and grandeur. But even the brightest suns must set. After Louis XIV's death in 1715, the palace fell silent. It would be years before Versailles felt royal again. Louis XV returned, retreating from the grandeur his predecessor had so meticulously built. But it was his grandson, Louis XVI, who would be Versailles' final king in residence. In 1774, Louis gave Marie Antoinette the Petit Trianon. There, she created a simpler world for her and her guests, a way of escaping from life in the palace. But while the Queen played at simplicity, life outside the gates was growing more desperate. France was facing economic ruin. Hunger gripped the cities. The monarchy, cloistered behind gilded doors, seemed increasingly out of touch. Whispers of revolution became roars. In October 1789, thousands marched from Paris to Versailles, demanding bread. They stormed the palace and forced the royal family to leave. Versailles had lost its monarchs, and they would never return. Though the mobs did not destroy it, the palace was left in silence. The mirrors reflected empty halls. The fountains ran for no one. The palace had become a ghost of monarchy, haunted not by spirits, but by memory. The 20th century opened under the shadow of war. When the First World War erupted, the palace was closed to visitors, and its most valuable works were secured and placed under protection. But unlike the devastation suffered by other regions, Versailles was never invaded. The gardens remained intact, the marble statues still stood. And though the crowds thinned, the spirit of the place endured. Then, in 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, marking the end of the Great War. For a brief moment, all eyes turned again to this storied palace. A place where history seemed destined to repeat itself. Today, Versailles is more than a monument. It's a living museum, a symphony of stone and story. Visitors come from around the world to walk its halls. Ever faithful to its origins, Versailles remains a sanctuary for art, beauty, and history. Each year, a new voice from the world of contemporary art is invited to leave their mark. Bridging past and present in a place where time refuses to stand still. Centuries have passed since the last king and queen walked these halls, yet Versailles still whispers their stories. The gardens, the mirrors, and the grand rooms stand as silent witnesses to ambition, love, scandal, and loss. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette may be gone, but their lives remain a window into a kingdom on the edge of change. And a palace that saw it all unfold.